Hi guys, it's Isis. Welcome back to my channel. This is going to be a little bit of a different type of show. This is going to be all about surviving narcissistic abuse and neglect. I was inspired to do this for a couple of reasons. One, I recently joined a support group for people who grew up with narcissistic parents who are now struggling to overcome all the abuse that happened to them during their childhood. And it occurred to me that there's a lot of people out in the world who don't have the ability to connect with others, or don't think that they have the ability to connect with others. And also there was this real, especially in my life, this real denial that anything was wrong within my family. Denial that happened. I was in denial, and I still see other people in my family in denial, like nothing was wrong, nothing bad happened, this was completely normal, everything that happened was completely normal, nothing bad happened, and we're fine. So I wanted to shoot this video because I realize, there's a lot of people out there that don't even realize anything bad happened to them. Because in our society, the standard is, if you're not being physically hit, if you're not being physically abused, it's not child abuse. And I'm sorry, but that is wrong. So what I'm going to do is, in this video, share my own story of narcissistic abuse, and then in later videos get into all the different aspects of narcissistic abuse, how they pit people against each other, the gaslighting, how they surround themselves with enablers. So in this video, I'm going to just share my own story of child abuse and how I survived it, and I'm going to sort of define terms for you. So in a family, usually within the adults, usually when this is happening in a family and one of the parents is a narcissist, one is a narcissist and one is an enabler. My story was a little bit different. My mom was the enabler, my uncle was the narcissist, and she worked for him, so we were financially dependent upon him, which made life very difficult and very challenging. You have to understand the way the narcissist's mind works. Okay, they are the sun. They are the center of the solar system, and everyone in their lives, their family, their friends, any of their employees, their co-workers, everyone exists who plays a part in their life. Imagine that they are the sun. Everyone who is a part of the narcissist's life, they exist in the narcissist's mind to move all the planets around the sun in perfect orbit the way the narcissist sees fit. So that is the only role that these people play, is to make sure that the narcissist is the center of the universe and gets everything that they want. That's how the narcissist's mind works. So every person in a narcissist's life fits into a couple of categories. One, they're either an extension of the narcissist, like their children. This is my child, this is my son, this is my daughter, like my arm or my leg, they are mine. That's why children who are raised by narcissists tend not to have any individual identities, because it's all about the narcissist, and they're raised to be an extension of this mentally ill parent. The other role that you can take on if you're in any type of relationship with a narcissist is the servant. They tend to think of you as the servant, especially if you are married or in a relationship. You exist to make them happy. You're there for sex when they want it. You're there to cook them dinner. You're there to give them everything that they want when they want it. If you're a coworker, you're there just to make them look good. You should have no ambitions of your own, and they'll get resentful of you if you do anything to contradict their own success. It's all about them. An extension of them, a servant, or an inanimate object. Now the other one, and the last one, is you are a threat to the narcissist. If you are not there being a servant or an extension of themselves, or just an inanimate object that has nothing to do with them, you become a threat. If you get in their way at all, you are a threat, and you need to be removed and eliminated. The narcissist in my life was my uncle. Now, he has hated me since the moment I was born, for several reasons. One, my mom was his main source of narcissistic supply, main enabler in his life. She knew, it was like watching them together, it was like she knew all of his commands. He would go this or that or make a gesture, and she would just snap to it and give him what he wants. It was like, dance, monkey, dance. She knew all of his gestures, all of his, vocal inflections, his command. She was like a well-trained dog, and she ended up working for him. So she was his main source of narcissistic supply. Now, you don't get in the way. In a narcissist's mind, you do not get between them and their narcissistic supply. So my mother having a daughter to take care of was just completely unacceptable to my uncle, because she had to be there to serve him as his main servant. That was her role. So I was in the way. And another thing you have to understand is that I was born 5 days after my uncle's son. So my cousin was born 5 days, same year, 5 days before me. So I was the first grandchild. Everybody else was a boy. I was surrounded by 2 older brothers and 5 male cousins my whole life. I was the only girl among this group of boys. So the fact that I was born 5 days after his son, and I came in and stole his thunder because his parents, my grandparents, were more excited to have the girl grandchild. How dare this child be born and steal my thunder? So from day one of my life, I was a threat. So my damage started at about age 4, and I think it started before that. There's pictures of me as an infant sitting on my narcissistic uncle's lap that just make my skin crawl. I have a really strong feeling he did horrible things to me when I was an infant, and I just can't remember. But my earliest memory of the abuse is being 4 years old and being at his house for Thanksgiving, and it was a long trip. And I was tired after the dinner, so my mom put me on the couch, with a blanket and a pillow, and tucked me in. And I just remembered this feeling of just love being tucked in, and then being woken up by being pushed onto the floor and having my ribs just slam into the hardwood floor under the couch, and just lying there with the wind completely knocked out of me. I couldn't move because I was too scared. I didn't know what had happened. I just woken up with, my whole body just slamming into the floor. And so he pushed me off the couch because maybe he wanted to sit in that spot where I was sitting. Maybe he just hated my guts and wanted to be a jerk. But this was the beginning of my social anxiety disorder. Another aspect of my childhood is that my father, he left before I was born. She chose to have a baby with an alcoholic, drug addict, schizophrenic. So my mom was always in this panic mode of my father was going to come back and kidnap me. She was always, every time we were out, she was just like so mindful of worrying about that. And I think I picked up on that energy. She was always in this panic over that happening, especially when I was very young, like birth to age 7, 8. That he was going to show up and just swoop in and kidnap me. So she was always in this constant state of panic when we were out socially. Then the other thing is this happened, this incident worth being pushed onto the couch when I was 4 years old. And like I said, I didn't know what happened. No adult had ever done anything like this to me, and kids always assume they did something wrong. Adults rule the world. So I must have done something horrible to deserve being hurt like that, was how my mind interpreted it. The other way my mind interpreted it was all strangers are dangerous. Every single stranger was a threat who was going to hurt me, because when you're a kid and something bad happens to you, we have this defense mechanism, and I'll post a link to this. I was reading about what happens like with childhood trauma. We get really defensive of ourselves. Nothing like that will ever happen to me again. So anytime you're in a situation that's remotely close to the one you got hurt, your defenses go up. So social anxiety disorder was sort of the main thing that happened as a result of this. Every time I was in a situation where strangers were around, I would get horrible social anxiety disorder. And this started around age 5, the day I started kindergarten. I remember this heart palpitations and nausea and dizziness, because every stranger was a monster or a potential monster because of this experience. And I think because of all the horrible things he did to me when I was an infant that I can't remember. So I started kindergarten, and it was around this time where I just accepted the fact that I was a freak and no one was going to like me, and this was the age where I started rejecting people before they had a chance to reject me. Because socially, I was just so terrified of people, so this became my defense mechanism. And it wasn't just this one incident being around him, it was just this, whenever he was around, it was this constant fear, this constant panic that I had to protect myself. And my subconscious brain just translated this into every new person is a potential monster. And because my mom was so accepting of him and so warm and welcoming to the monster, I didn't know who else was going to come in that was going to be scary or dangerous or evil. I have memories of physical abuse. Once me and my friend were making a fort in the living room when we were setting up all these pillows and blankets, and she wanted juice. So I got her a cup of juice because she was thirsty, and she spilled the juice on the rug, and my mom came in and just saw that the juice was on the rug, and I got backhanded across the face for this because my friend spilled juice on the rug. And so I was like, okay, I will never spill juice on the rug. I'll never drink juice away from the table. This is something I can do. Mom is mad at me for something that I did. Another time, and they say it takes a village to raise a child. It is so hard to be a single parent because she would work these long hours. She would come home and be exhausted. So one night, I'd had a really bad nightmare, and I woke her up because I was scared. And I guess this had been happening over and over and over again for like a couple of weeks. I was just going through a phase where I was having really bad nightmares, as kids do. But this one night, she was just so exhausted that she just started screaming at me because I woke her up, and she became scarier than whatever was in the nightmare that I, was afraid of. And this memory haunted her more than it haunted me. She said, I sat on the ground and I crawled into a ball and I put my head down because I was so afraid of her because of how she was acting. And I think she hit me, and then I was afraid I was going to get hit again. And so I just never woke her up again. So the physical abuse, it was like, okay, I won't spill juice, and I won't wake her up, and I can do things and I can avoid them. The physical abuse was always a result of I did something that made her mad. Well, I can just not do this, and I can not do this again. No problem. The verbal and emotional abuse was the memories of it for me, and I've heard other people say this, the memories of the verbal and the emotional abuse were worse because that was who you were. You are lazy. You are a slob. You are stupid. These are not things that you can change about yourself as a child. These become things that become rooted in what you believe about yourself. You are whatever the negative message is. You are stupid. You are lazy. That is something that you are. There's nothing you can do to change that. And that just becomes part of your wiring about who you are. So that was the difference between physical abuse and verbal abuse. My memories of the verbal and the emotional abuse were worse because those were things that were just bad about me. Those were unchangeable. With the narcissist, you're either an extension of them, their servant, an inanimate object, or a threat. I was a threat because no matter how many hours my mother worked for my narcissistic uncle, he was resentful over any time she gave me attention, or she had to take the day off to go spend time with me, or if she had a parent-teacher conference, or anything it was. I was his competition, a 9-year-old girl. Everything about me was bad and stupid and not satisfactory. The way I walked was wrong. The way I breathed was wrong. Anytime I did something that he didn't like, normal adults, if you're doing something, will say, honey, please stop doing that. You're making noise. You have to be quiet here. He would be like, this inconsiderate child has the nerve to do this and this and this, what we're trying to do, whatever it was. I mean, it was just, stand up like he was going to deliver these Shakespearean monologues about what a horrible little bitch I was in front of everybody. The more of an audience he had, the happier he was. They love being the center of attention. So, children need to be taught that they're useless. Insecure children are not insecure just because that's the way they are. Sorry, but you fucked up as a parent. You taught them that they were useless, that they were stupid, that they were lazy, that they weren't worth your time. Nobody comes into the world believing that about themselves. Children have to be taught that they're useless, and I certainly was. If my shoes squeaked loudly on the floor, I would be criticized. If I was breathing too heavily, I would be criticized. And so I taught myself to be as small as possible, just to be smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until you're insignificant and completely invisible within your own mind. That's how you see yourself. But you become that way to avoid the criticism. So I got really horrible posture And to this day, I have like hypertensive neck from like this childhood of just living in fear and constantly cowering in the corner and trying to be invisible so he wouldn't look at me, he wouldn't notice me, he wouldn't target me. So I remember one time, specific examples, he had a screen, like a sliding glass screen for his patio. You couldn't see it. He had walked through it himself. He had other people who had walked through it. For some reason, the way the light or the sun hit this area whenever the screen door was closed, nobody could see it. So several people had walked through the screen door. He had done it himself, but that didn't matter. When I did it, I was such a fucking idiot. How could I not see the screen? How could I possibly be so stupid? And they can't just say it. When they see a child as their enemy, as their competition, they will say it until your face is burning red, until tears are streaming down your cheeks, until you're hoping that the floor opens up and swallows you whole just so you can get away from the verbal abuse. They will ride your ass for 20 minutes and then constantly come back and talk about how horrible you are. If you mess up in any way, you will be targeted. And as he was doing this to me, my mom would just stand there with her mouth open and just be like, well, you did mess up. So he was giving a speech at one of his parties. He would always, narcissists have this social circle where everything is structured. They love to belong to groups and clubs and institutions and go to these events within groups and institutions because they can't really connect emotionally with anyone, and friendships are they're impossible, like true friendships and any sort of relationship with give and take, it's impossible for them to develop. So they love organized institutions or groups. So my uncle had his restaurants, and everybody in his restaurant, all of his employees were part of his group. So he would have these parties, and attendance was mandatory. And so one time he was giving a speech at the table, and he was just going on and on and on about how wonderful his restaurant is or something. They love to talk about themselves. And I made a comment to somebody there. I whispered something in her ear, and I made her laugh in the middle of his speech. So he got up, picked up his wine, threw it on us, and covered us both with wine. Now, I got covered more than she did because I was closer to where he was sitting. And then at the end of the night, my mom said that karma decided that I would be the one that deserved to get covered in wine because I was the one who interrupted his speech. Nothing was wrong with his behavior. It's perfectly fine to pick up a glass of red wine and throw it onto my child and one of my closest friends. That's perfectly fine. Nothing's wrong with his behavior. It's totally normal. Oh, another incident was, my uncle walked into the kitchen completely naked in front of me when I was 9 years old. This junk swinging out. And I felt like it was, looking back on it, it was just another way of like making me feel really, really uncomfortable. You know, anything he could do to exert his power and control. And after it was done, my mom was like, oh, he's just very liberal and, really out, just very liberal. It's totally normal. That's just the way he is. Very liberal. Okay, yeah, perfectly normal to expose your penis to your 9-year-old niece. That's perfectly fine, especially when she doesn't have a father. Has never, been around a naked man in her life. Perfectly normal. With his own children, when his two sons, one was a scapegoat, one was the golden child, and he destroyed these boys emotionally. Any sensitivity or tenderness that they expressed was criticized. Oh, you're a pussy, you're a wimp. Watching any movies that provoked any sentimentality was bad. Once we were watching A Christmas Story and we were laughing at it, the part where the kid has to put the bunny costume on. My uncle walked into the room and said that this was disgusting, this traditional family. He hated anything traditional. Hated it. And, everything had to be completely untraditional. He hated holidays. He hated birthdays. Nothing could be celebrated. So this movie was completely offensive. But it was all right to rent his son's torture porn films. My cousin came over to me once and told me about the movie they rented last night and the woman who was put into the breast press and how her breasts were completely crushed, and this was awesome to watch. So, just to review, in my uncle's mind, A Christmas Story is horrible and offensive, but torture porn is perfectly fine to show to a 9 and a 12-year-old boy. Perfectly fine. I was so conditioned not to talk about this. Okay, I remember this one incident at one of my uncle's parties. One of his employees had recently gotten engaged. So this man, we'll call him Jim, okay? That wasn't his real name, but I'm changing everybody's names. So we'll call him Jim. He showed up with a guitar to my uncle's party because Jim was a musician, and Jim had recently gotten engaged to one of the girls who also worked at my uncle's restaurant. So how dare you, this is my uncle, this is the way his mind works, how dare you come into my home, come to my party with a musical instrument and play it in front of my guests and have them watch you, and how dare you show up with this great news of you're getting married. And this was a really sensitive spot for my uncle because he had recently been divorced and his wife had kicked him out. I can't imagine why. And so he recently got a separate house and they were living in separate homes. So this was, marriage and relationships was a huge sore spot for my uncle. And Jim comes in with a guitar and a woman on his arm who has an engagement ring on her finger. How dare you? So me and my friend and my cousin were on our bikes, and we'd gone out and left the party and were riding around the neighborhoods on our bikes, and we came home, well, not home, but back to my uncle's house where the party was. We're riding our bikes up a hill, get to the top of the driveway. We see Jim's guitar go flying through the front door, okay? And we hear them screaming at each other, and Jim is screaming, "You're real effing happy that somebody's getting married." And then they come out of the house. My uncle jumps on Jim's back, and they have this big fight in the middle of the yard, and all the employees come out, and the men are trying to pry them apart. Unbelievable. So, yeah, this was awful. But I remember afterwards, my mom refused to talk about what her brother had done, refused to talk about the fight. This never happened. We were just going to ignore this fight. It never happened. Don't talk about it. And then afterwards, of course, the screen on the front door that the guitar had gone through, it was just unbelievable how narcissists will surround themselves with enablers. Everybody who worked for him was an enabler, because if they didn't enable him and weren't there just to kiss his ass and just, oh yes, 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 you are God, they were fired. So I remember one of the women who worked for him just standing there looking at the screen that the guitar had passed through and just being like, oh, these screens are just so badly manufactured and they just come off so easily, and this is just totally the fault of bad manufacturing. Yeah, okay, this has nothing to do with the fact that the guitar went through the screen. Let's talk about everything except the grown man acting like a 5-year-old having a temper tantrum. Unbelievable. So we don't talk about that. And I remember once one of my friends from my hometown of upstate New York, we were living in Connecticut at the time, and she said to me, why don't you want to work at your uncle's store? Why don't you want to work? She was, I think we were 13 at the time, and you had to be 15 legally to get a job. So she's like, do you know how many skirts and dresses and tops you could buy at the mall if you had a job? How much makeup? She was like obsessed with fashion and clothes. So she was writing me about why. If my uncle had a store, I would work there. That would be awesome. You could have a job. And she was just writing me. She was, very pushy personality, and I couldn't say to her, my uncle is a mean jerk, I don't want to work for him. I couldn't say that. Couldn't express anything bad about him. We don't talk about him in a negative light. That had been so ingrained in me from an early age that we do not talk badly about him. Nobody, you don't. He has a fight, jumps on somebody's back, throws a guitar, we don't talk about it. Couldn't say to my friend, he's a jerk. The only time I could ever bring this up to my mother was I had another friend who was working, her mother was also working for my uncle, and her mother did all the baking for the restaurant. She made all the pies and the cakes and the desserts. So I remember my friend walked over to me and said once, your uncle was an asshole. My mother was baking for 8 hours. She made all these cakes and all these pies. She's finally done baking, calls her up and tells her that he doesn't want anything that she made. He's changing his order. And he expected her to just bake for another 8 hours, and just everything that she made, well, you can just throw that out, can't you? And we had a long talk about how horrible my uncle was after that. This was the only time I was able to talk about it, because somebody else came over to me and told me how horrible they thought this person was, how horrible they thought my uncle was. So my mom got home, and I finally felt like, oh, I can talk about this. I'm allowed to talk about this because somebody else mentioned it. She shut me down so fast. We do not talk about when you have a job and you have a boss. That's just what happens. Door slammed. Not talking about this. it was not until I was in college where I had an incident, but finally I was just like, I'm done with this asshole. No contact is when you have no contact with your narcissist. You just cut them off. You are done. What finally drove me to this was I was in college and I had a girlfriend who was in the dorms with me, and I wanted to introduce her to my cousin, the narcissist's son, because they were the same age, they had similar interests. I thought they would be so cute together. So I brought her to a family event. My uncle had a timeshare in Vermont and we went for the weekend. Oh my God. I bring in this beautiful young college girl. My uncle, who's in his 40s or 50s at that point, saw this girl and thought she was so beautiful and decided that he wanted her. So the entire weekend he spent belittling and cutting up his son. His own son was his sexual competition for the weekend. And I was targeted, of course, because I always was. Oh, you're stupid, you're ugly, you're lazy. He was horrible to me all weekend. And of course my mom, at this point, she was not working for him anymore. She got slapped across the face and fired from his restaurant after 10, 15 years of loyal service with no severance pay. And he bought her 5% share and that was it. So she's no longer financially tied to this man. Has not been for years. Still enabling him. Still in this dysfunctional family unit of we have to support, the narcissist. Everything he says is right, is perfect. Still enabling him. That weekend we left, I said to her, I am done with him. I am so done. This is bullshit. The fact that you put up with this is bullshit. I am never going to be in a situation where I am alone with him. I'm never going to one of his parties. I'm never attending any event that he's hosting because this is how he treats people. I am done. And the guilt trips that my mother tried to lay on me after that, I had two things that helped me. I talked about it with other family members, especially my brothers who had children, who I did not want their children around this monster. So I told them everything that happened, and it was a way of me getting it out and talking about it, and it was therapeutic to just finally be able to talk about it. So the guilt trips my mother would lay on me, the only other time I was around my uncle was if it was at somebody else's house and he was there. And I would look at him like he was dirt under my shoe, and I would turn my back on him and walk away. And that is how I treated him every time I had to be around him after I decided to go no contact. He was there, but to me, he was just an inanimate object. I refused to interact with him. My mother pulls me aside. The narcissist feels so bad because he thinks all his nieces and nephews hate him because what you told everybody about him. Now, don't you feel bad about telling everybody the truth? No, I do not. I will do another video about how I finally realized what happened to me. I always knew that I hated my uncle. I always knew he was a jerk, but I didn't understand the full effects, like the psychological effects that this had on me until 2011 when I got married. What he did finally made me see him with adult eyes, finally made me see how he was acting and what his behavioral patterns were as an adult. It was the first time I wasn't witnessing this as a child because I cut him off years ago. So as an adult, witnessing this made me go back and review my entire childhood. And it was like, oh my God. After I studied narcissistic abuse, it was like, this memory makes sense, and this memory makes sense, and this memory makes sense. It was suddenly all the pieces fell into place. It was why this completely insane behavior of his, why he did it. It was like, oh, that's why. It made so much sense after I started studying narcissists and how the mind works. It was like, wow. It was like the light went on. It was amazing. I'm also writing a novel about what it is like to be a child and live in a family where you have to survive narcissistic abuse, what it does to you day to day. How you survive it, what your daily life becomes, and the walls that you have to put up to protect yourself, and the scarring that it does. So yeah, there's two children in the book, a boy and a girl. One is the scapegoat, one is the golden child, and how this psychologically affects them throughout their entire lives. If you have been through this, I would encourage you to, one, get a therapist and talk it out. And two, I think even more importantly than that, you must find people. You must find people who understand, who have been through abuse as children, verbal abuse, too, because our society does not accept verbal abuse and emotional abuse as abuse. If you're not being hit, it doesn't count. If the kids are not being hit, you can say anything horrible to them, you can tell them that they're pieces of shit, you can scream at them, you can make them feel this big, you can destroy their self-esteem. That's not abuse. That's what our society thinks. You must find people who understand. I suggest going to meetup.com and finding a meetup about surviving narcissistic abuse. If there isn't one, start one. You will be amazed at how many people show up and are willing to listen to you, share their experiences with you, have you help them, and have them help you. It's so important. You must find people who have been through it, because everybody else, they don't understand. It wasn't abuse. That's your mother. That's your father. That's your uncle. How can you cut your family member off like that? Shame, shame. Don't you feel bad? That's what most people who don't understand, that's what they think. So if you've been through this, I completely encourage you to find other people who understand you. It's so very important. Future videos, I'll be doing one about what happens when you go no contact, about how they pit family members against each other, how the narcissist will do that to keep everybody. The narcissist wants everybody in the family on a chessboard, and they want everybody in their square. They want everybody placed where they can move everyone around and control and manipulate everyone in the family. So I'll do another video about that. I'll do a video about the guilt that, you know, the enablers try to inflict on the victims when you decide you've had enough. The mind of the enabler, what drives them. Why are they like this? There has to be a reason why they are willing to accept so much abuse and so much mistreatment, and, you know, throw their children under the bus. As you know, they're actually, enablers, I find, are more comfortable when their children are being targeted by the narcissist, because as long as somebody else is getting the brunt of the abuse, the enabler feels safe. Please subscribe. If you've been a victim of narcissistic abuse, please comment below. You know, please find support groups. They're out there. You can heal from this. You don't have to walk around feeling angry all the time. And I'll do videos about overcoming the anger. Your rage is completely valid. You have every right to be mad. You have every right to be furious that your parent let you be abused or your parent abused you. But you also have the right to overcome this, move past the anger, and live a completely happy, well-balanced life.